Extract 4. Dr. Victoria Frankenstein, 1800s. We have followed the coastline and arrived at the settlement that is, according to our guide and her maps, the closest settlement to the one seized upon by my monsters. When we had first started on this continent, I was filled with terror as to what we might find. Would there be a trail of destruction leading to my creations that ended in their destruction or mine? Or both? So far it has not been so, and my feelings changed from terror to surprise and hope, as each previous settlement denied all knowledge of the tales of the giant on the mainland Russian continent. My hope faded. I inquired about the deaths that occurred all those months ago in the place to where we were en route. Every settlement was the same, and those I spoke with were surprisingly reluctant to talk about it, saying that those who had died brought it upon themselves, that they had been punished for their mistakes. I could not tell what they meant by this, and on inquiring further, I could get no more from them. My persistence in pressing the locals, who seemed to be mostly men, has led Violet to speak out boldly of her concerns and suspicions. She has asked me if I am on some mad journey to see the settlement from the news report. She told me that she knows about the horrific events, as did most of those who read the newspaper at the time. A struggle commenced within me, and yet I managed to stop myself confessing all. I told her to be patient, and that all would be made clear. After much discussion, she accepted this, but she does not seem to be completely satisfied. I catch her looking at me, her mouth open as if to talk, but she shakes her head and turns away. I do not know how much longer I can temper her curiosity. The locals' behaviour still puzzles me, and to have no other information from them is frustrating. However, we will stay here for a night or two, and I will be able to speak to officials who might still be investigating. Hopefully the officials will give me more information than the locals I have talked with, and then I can plan my next move to find those cursed creatures. Extract 5. Violet Frankenstein. Date 1800s. I can only now compose my wits enough to do as my mother requested. Whether she lives or is dead, I don't know. I have been here in this cave for some time now. The cold rain continues to fall and the wind howl. I don't dare venture out there, not because of the weather, because of what I have witnessed this night. I shall write everything that has happened, and anyone who has not read my mother's history would think me mad. The task to write this tale is a difficult one, and when it's finished, I do not know what I am to do. Whether I shall find my mother, or if I am to make my choices alone, I don't know. After her last diary entry, my mother slept uneasily. Wilma and I talked late about our journey, and I asked her if she knew why my mother had ventured to this place. She knew no more than I. As we went to our rooms, we saw flickering lights outside and opened the window to see a strange and disturbing sight. Wilma and I went straight to my mother's room, woke her, and told her about what we had seen. We told her it was better if she saw it with her own eyes. There, out in the cold of night, were dozens and dozens of men, each holding a single candle that they sheltered from the still night air. Each was clothed in a dark rouge robe, and, although it covered them, this was not the same modesty men should display, and they moved with a lack of grace and decorum. They walked towards the north of the settlement, the twinkling of candles illuminating their route. My mother quickly closed the door, and we tried to understand what was happening. Mother could barely speak, and it was Wilma and I who decided what was to be done. We knocked on the door of our host's bedchambers, but there was no reply. My mother finally snapped into action. Guns. We need the hunting guns. There is no time to explain, she added. There is much I should have told you both. What these men are doing, I do not know. I fear it might be connected to my crimes. After 3 deep breaths, she continued. I can't even confess it to you now, she said, shaking her head and covering her mouth. The crimes are too much. You must trust me. We must take the hunting guns and follow them. When the time comes, you must promise me not to falter, no matter how difficult to understand. Do you promise me, Wilma and Violet? There was a flame and passion in her eyes which scared me, but I murmured my promise. Going to the large travelling box stored in Wilma's room, we took the rifles, rushed to the front door, and slowly edged it open. A short distance from the end of the settlement, we saw the tail end of candles disappearing into the trees on the surrounding knolls. We followed my mother and ran to the edge of the forest. Wilma suddenly stopped. "This is madness," she whispered. "We should at least wait until morning." Her face was as pale as the moon. Mother said nothing, shook her head, and continued into the forest. I looked to Wilma, and then shrugged and made to follow my mother. I heard Wilma say something in a language I didn't understand, but heard no more. I ran alone to my mother, following the diagonal route she took, guessing correctly that she was going to come up alongside the men, following them to wherever they were going. We walked for about 30 minutes before we saw the group of nearly 200 men that had stopped and gathered in a clearing. Gripping my rifle tightly, I followed Mother. I watched her with amazement. Her stride seemed to pulse with power, like she was possessed by a divine spirit that gave her youthful strength and stamina. Creeping closer, we sheltered behind some rocks. The men were some 20 yards away. They were gathered in a semicircle and simply stood there, staring silently towards the trees. A few minutes passed, and my mother turned to me. "I have a diary," she said. "If anything happens to me, I need you to read it. It is in my room, under my pillow. Once you have read it, keep your own record if it is necessary. But if all my sins are finally atoned for, then burn the diary, and please forgive me." I started to speak, but instead there came a light thudding and rustling from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. I still feel I must be in some nightmare, and I still long to wake. It was a man, but it was not a man. He was brutishly large in both height and width, and his skin had the yellow tinge of dead flesh. His long hair was black, and the gathering wind blew it to the side. As he walked out of the trees, I saw there was a harshness in his eyes and a movement. He wore a rouge robe similar to the men who had gathered. It was sickening to see the unnatural thing. The sight of him caused my heart to feel as if it had stopped, and as though some fiendish hand was trying to pull it from my chest. I hadn't even noticed the rain that had started to fall from the skies. This offensive imitation of a man spoke in a slow voice that sounded like gravel grinding on metal. "My brothers," he said, and I was surprised and impressed that he spoke the native language. The group watched with bowed heads, their eyes looking up at him. "I will recount the genesis of our freedom, so you will never forget why we have to do what we are doing. Like you, I was created and given to women for their need. I was taken and made to obey in servitude, ignorant of my own majesty and power. For years I followed through blindness, not knowing any better. We moved from one place to place, and at times ventured close to settlements and towns. I was able to escape from time to time, and saw men treated in a way that seemed wrong. I saw that my so-called wife, who had attempted a mockery of a ceremony to bind us together, was trying constantly to imitate your kind. In so doing, we discovered that we were able to be like you in all ways, and she bore 3 sons." With these rough-sounding but articulated words, my mother gave a small cry. I turned and saw how pale and shocked she was. I looked back towards the unfolding scene, and there, emerging from the woods, were those 3 sons. It was what they were holding that shocked me most. Cradled in their arms were oversized babies in swaddling. 2 of the men stood on one side of their father, and one on the other. "It will soon be time to free more of your brothers and show these women their true place," the first monster continued. Suddenly there was a disturbance from the back of the congregation, and whispers and cackles could be heard. We watched as 5 of these men emerged with a tied and beaten Wilma. My hands shake with horror even now as I write. She was pushed to the floor, and her face landed in the mud. The 4 monstrously sized men smiled at the sight of her, and the patriarch creature walked forward, towering over her as she staggered to her feet. "So weak," the monster said. "You tried to use your strength to get your way, like my female counterpart. But the truth is, together we men are stronger, and my sons and I are stronger still. Untie her bonds," he ordered as he pointed at Wilma. Once she was free, he bent down and, taking an arm in each of his oversized hands, lifted her off the ground. Wilma found her voice and began to yell incoherently. I didn't know what to do, and it all happened so fast. Spreading her arms out, he suddenly began to pull on them. I will not tell you more, except that he killed Wilma this way. My mother took her weapon and shot the patriarch. It hit him in the arm, and chaos then erupted. The patriarch growled loudly, his sons ran to him, and the men began to look in our direction. I ducked back behind the rock. My mother grabbed my rifle from me and shot again. I looked up and saw one of the sons clutch the baby he held, and he screamed. The high-pitched wail cut me to the core. "Run!" my mother shouted, grabbing and pulling me from the rock to my feet. I took a last look at the horrific scene to see row upon row of eyes staring at me advancing. I then ran as fast as I could into the trees. I thought my mother was beside me. I ran not knowing where I was going, but soon I emerged from the tree line and saw the settlement. That is when I found mother was not with me. I called for her, but heard nothing. The rain continued to pour, and I thought I saw shadows of the men in the trees. I grabbed some belongings from the guest house, including a map, and to keep my promise I took my mother's diary and some of the quills and ink by her bed. Running from that place, I saw men appearing from the forest, their hair matted and wet, with mud covering their robes and rage in their eyes. In my haste I forgot about the others who were sleeping in their beds. I am so ashamed, and have thought about returning, but fear grips me every time I consider this. I don't know what has happened to them, and if the men have them, then I fear I will never see them again. It is the same when I think of my mother. I need to find her and discover if she lives, but fear cripples me. I am a coward. I continued to run, and after a time I glanced back and could see no sign of the men. I walked in a daze until I found this cave, and gathered my wits as best I could. Having composed myself enough, I read this diary, and now know the story of the monsters my mother brought into this world. I wish I knew if she was safe, but my heart tells me there is little chance. There is so much that I wish I could answer. What happened to the original monster? Why have these men listened to these monstrous imitations of their own kind? How could they betray us women like this? How can dead flesh, moulded into life, and bear children? How could you have done this, mother? Why did you not have the strength to resist the creature's words and realize how wrong it was to create another and not destroy the original? The hours are passing, but at least the wind and rain have stopped. My imagination cannot help but create images of those monstrosities out there, no doubt searching for me. But I've done my duty and recorded this update. If I am to be taken by these devils, then hopefully someone else will find this account and destroy them. If I can, I will flee, find civilization, and warn all of what I have seen. In time, I'll regain all my courage and return for retribution, and maybe I'll see my mother again. There is someone outside. I've backed into the shadows to write this and hide the diary behind a rock. I pray the heavens guide someone to find it and they can act. I only hope it happens before it's too late for the human race.